Welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton. And today's guest is Elisheva Schwartz, speaking on honoring individual learning styles in your child. Elisheva Schwartz is the creator of the Dyslexia Quest Podcast and the Dyslexia Quest Parent Courses. In the past 5 years, she has birthed and midwifed a revolutionary movement of individuals committed to seeing learning differences as opportunities, not just hindrances. She's taught hundreds of parents who have taken her 8-week online course, The Secret Tools of Resilience, that they can then pass down to their children, regardless of how stressful the school situation can become, and her podcast at number 29 on the education category of iTunes. At her core, she's endlessly fascinated with what makes us who we are in the world and how we can create learning and work environments that optimize for individual differences, holistic human flourishing, resilience, and unleashed potential. For more information, please visit her website at elishevashwartz.com. Welcome, Elisheva, to this call. I'm excited to have you on today.
My absolute pleasure. It's a delight to be here.
Yes. So today we're going to talk a little bit about you, what you do with the, as far as the Dyslexia Quest, your program, and, why you're so passionate about supporting parents in recognizing the individual learning style of their child and how to help their children thrive despite whatever their learning style may be.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's do it.
So let's talk about like, number one, what is dyslexia? Because I think there is a lot of misnomer out there about what it is, what it looks like. And then you can tell us why you are so passionate about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love starting there because most people don't know what dyslexia is. And most people think dyslexia is letter reversals, or when you look at a page, the letters are moving around. And although some dyslexic kids reverse letters past what's developmentally appropriate, and some dyslexic individuals might struggle to focus on the letters, that's actually not what dyslexia is. And dyslexia is a really common individual difference in learning. And researchers show that it's somewhere around 20% of all individuals. So when researchers went into a classroom and they just gave every single person an assessment, they found that around 20% of the students were actually dyslexic. And dyslexia is any time there's an unexplained difficulty with reading and some other school-related tasks, despite high levels of intelligence and opportunities for learning. So these are students that are showing, high levels of competency in other areas, and they have the same learning opportunities as their siblings or their neighbors and their friends. And for whatever reason, they're struggling with specific academic skills. And I'm really passionate about bringing awareness around this issue. And I specifically love talking to parenting communities. And I specifically love coming on parenting podcasts because it's a huge part of the parenting story. And because individuals are in a relationship with school and academia for so long, school almost takes upon itself the psychological weight of almost another caregiver in a child's in a child's psyche. So the same way we're products very much of our mom, and we're products of our dad, and we're products of our family culture, we're also very much a product of our school culture. Because if you think about the amount of time we spend in school, it's a huge influence on the child's life. And the thing about school, and the thing about having traumatic experiences in school, or experiences where you feel undervalued or not seen, is that it has a chronic component. So very often I'm dealing with these students that are not flourishing in the traditional school system, and you're talking about years and years and years of struggle. And I'm sure in the medical community, when you're talking about these adverse childhood effects, that if it's a chronic experience, it's going to have a really strong impact on the development of selfhood. And so often, so many other things are talked about in our kind of cultural imagination around childhood and around flourishing childhood and around thriving, happy families. And we talk about, different family constellations, and we talk about, how moving could be a trauma. And we talk about how divorce could be a trauma, and all these kinds of things. And often it leaves a huge vacuum of language and a huge vacuum of narrative around the experience of a child and a family that is really struggling in the traditional school model. And so often there are families where for years when their children are coming home, homework is just a disaster. There is meltdowns, there is resistance. The child is saying, I don't want to go to school. The child doesn't feel like school's working for them. There's maybe there's anger, maybe there's resentment, maybe there's flare-ups. And often parents are looking to the left and looking to their right, and they don't understand why it's so challenging for them, why it seems like everybody else can just, go home and do their homework at the kitchen counter and then go off to school and enjoy the sweet teachers. And it seems like it's so complicated for them. And maybe it wasn't complicated for other siblings. Maybe their older siblings had it easier. And yet somehow there's this one child that things are really a struggle. So I'm really passionate to, one, broaden our cultural conversation around the impact that not doing well in the traditional educational model can have on the development of psyche and self, and to really support families and parents, especially moms, in the tremendous job of holding space and parenting a child that might be dealing with a lot of what I call big feelings. So little people with big feelings, often there's rage, there's anger, there's resentment, there's sadness. And parents often feel a sense of like directionless around how can they really immunize and fortify their child to become a happy, flourishing, expansive, resilient child that loves learning, despite the fact that for many families, this is the option that they have, and that the traditional educational model is what they need to be reckoning with. So I think there's a whole lot of things that parents can do. There's a whole lot of perspectives that parents can marinate in that can help them feel empowered in that stance.
Wow. I mean, this is such powerful work that you're doing. And I do appreciate that this is beyond learning. This is about the child's self-esteem. It's about their subconscious mind, which we know is formed the first 7 years of their life. And typically the biggest influence on the subconscious mind is our parents for most children, but it's important to recognize the school's formation in that as well, right? Most children start school before 7. So how is the school influencing their sense of self as well? I mean, this is potentially impactful for the rest of that child's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sometimes if you're looking from the outside in, it can be hard to see the magnitude of some of these experiences that children have. And for example, there could be a child that is forever getting B minuses, right? They're getting B minuses. And an adult might look in and they might say, like, it's not such a big deal, right? My child is not flunking out. They're not failing out. But for their child, if they knew that their best friends and their siblings and everybody around them is getting easy A's, and for whatever reason, despite how hard they try and how much intention they bring, they can't bring a B minus, and it's a consistent chronic experience that is going on for years, to that child, it doesn't matter if an objective party will say, like, this isn't a big deal. It actually seems huge, because children will often make sense of that. And they'll create a story in their mind that sounds something like, it doesn't matter how hard I try, somehow I'm always going to be behind the pack. Or another thing that people often don't take into account in terms of the social, emotional, developmental impact that it can have on a child is that because the power differential is so huge between a student and a child, every experience of criticism is actually magnified quite a bit to a young child. So if the child is only getting reinforcement that sounds like try harder, I think you can be doing more. I want you to pay more attention. So something that might sound like benign to somebody listening, like, oh, it's just a really sweet teacher that devoted her life to supporting children, is maybe getting a little fatigued and frustrated and doesn't know how to deal with this child, is just saying, I want you to work harder at this, or I want you to try harder. But because the power differential is huge, and this maybe 8 or 9-year-old child really wants to impress this teacher, I want you to try harder might actually metabolize in this child's body as I'm never enough, or there's nothing that I can do that would be enough. And you have to keep in mind, this is in the context of having a mismatched educational environment to the child's learning style. So what's happening is the child often is maxed out at the amount of effort that they can put in, and they're not getting the results that they need. So traditionally, we tend to work with this kind of like mathematical equation in the school system, that the harder you work, the more you'll reap the rewards. And it's kind of this like really empowering belief that like, if you tell people to work hard, and if you're motivated, and if you put your best foot forward, and if you try, then you'll reap the rewards. But it's actually not that simple. It's a really dynamic environment, and individual differences in learning plays a huge component. So if you have a child that is being taught in a way that is not does not work for their learning styles, what you actually see is somebody that is metaphorically banging their head against the wall. And it has a terrible ramification, because what develops is the sense of learned helplessness, which is this deep sense of disempowerment, where it's after this failed experience of 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 years of trying to put your best foot forward and trying to impress the adults in your environment, trying to be seen as capable and competent. What you have is a learned message that doesn't matter how hard I try, I still won't be successful, which is actually extremely disempowering. Or you have coping mechanisms around, not the child not trying their best because they don't want to deal with the disappointment. So you'll see avoidant behavior, you'll see lack of trying, lack of motivation, opting out. I mean, like a million different ways that it can manifest. And what I think is important to continually remind people is that these beliefs about the self and the world, and what it means to show your best work, and what it means to be seen and recognized, and what it means to be working with authority, and what it means to be receiving instruction, these ideas and beliefs and feelings do not stay in the domain of the subject where the child is struggling. They actually become embedded in a cohesive sense of self and orientation to the world, and they'll leak out in other areas of the child's life. So even in domains that they might be well suited to, unless you actually take a look at what's going on in the interiority of the child, and you have open, clear dialogue, and some of these things are looked at and worked on, it can have an extremely crippling effect on the child.
Wow. Oh my God, that's so powerful. So I think I wanted to just back up a couple steps and share your personal story of your childhood, and essentially I'm going to call you a success story because despite the challenges you had as a child, what you've been able to now come away as an adult.
Yeah. So I've been fascinated about this topic since I've been a very little girl. And I actually have memories being in sometime before 5th grade, because I transferred schools. And I remember being in the earlier school, sitting in the bathroom. There was a little like lounge area before the bathroom where there was like a bench. And I was ditching class and just thinking about, like educational theory. And I was in this super beautiful building, and in this like expensive Jewish day school. And I remember it was the first year or the second year that we were in this new building because the school did construction. And I remember thinking, a building does not make great education, because there's a beautiful building and I'm getting a bad education. Like I was very critical about like what this school was after and what they were trying to deliver. And I always kind of had I was trying to make sense of my experience, because I struggled very much in the traditional school system. And those academic struggles quickly became behavioral issues. And from the time I was like in 3rd grade, I was being asked to leave the class and go to the principal's office often. And by the time I was in 5th grade, I was getting sent home for a few days at a time. And really by the time I was a junior in high school, one day I woke up and I had such deep fatigue. I just could not possibly go to school. And I thought I was going to spend maybe a week at home taking a sick week. And it ended up being close to half the school year where I had a deep, deep, deep bone level fatigue. I spent most of it resting. And it wasn't like a depressive listlessness where you just need to sleep. It was like years and years and years of running myself down and running my adrenals down and being in a perpetual state of a cortisol response and a fight or flight response. And my body said no. Even like my mind had like no part of it. My body was just like a strong no. And I'm so thankful to my parents that they really honored that time and they let me be in that space that I very much needed to be in. And they were going around trying to get doctor's notes to excuse me. And the school was very livid and upset and wanted to kick me out. And it was a whole complicated thing. And eventually I returned and I went on to study cognitive science and individual differences in learning and neuropsych and became fascinated with what does it mean to have individual differences in learning, specifically what are the evidence-based strengths of the dyslexic processing style, which maybe we'll talk about later. But it was at that moment when I was a junior in high school where it became super clear that I can't continue trying to like muscle my way through to success. And I can't continue to just do education and do learning and possibly doing life the way that other people are prescribing it to me, because it was clear that I was going against the grain of what was natural. And it was evident that I would not be able to continue that way. And I became really obsessed with this question of what does it mean to work with kind of the way I was designed? What does it mean to work with my strengths? And I think on a specific level, that has really inspired the work that I do around individual differences in learning and supporting families and individuals on that path. But more generally has really been a question that has animated much of my passions around what does it mean when we stop rehearsing a shame narrative around deficiency and really claim more and more deeply the essential parts of ourself and are able to are able to live from that place where we, in a healthy way, advocate for our individual differences, whether that is temperament, whether that is learning, whether that is deep psycho, spiritual, social, emotional needs.
Wow. I keep saying that. I'm so impressed with what you're sharing and your passion for it. And, I'm curious with your story, when you were a junior in high school and you were physically finally able to return to school, how did the learning process look different? Were you able to start doing it differently for your senior year, or what happened?
Yeah, well, I think that a huge part of what was really draining me, like deeply, deeply draining me to the point that I had zero energy, was that every new semester and every time I had was meeting new teachers in school or just starting a new semester of grades, I was fully convinced that like this is the semester that I'm going to crush it so profoundly and be so impressive and come across as like so intelligent that I will all of a sudden like rewrite this entire story about like who I am in the world and my competence and what I'm capable of through the validation of the grades. And I would get amazing grades. And this was around the time when college was very much on my mind because I was a junior in high school and everybody was talking about visiting colleges and applications and SATs. And I would wake up one day and I'm going to get amazing scores on my SATs and I'm going to magically end up in all these prestigious Ivy League schools. And then everybody will say, wow, Elisheva, she is so impressive and intelligent and we never knew that about her. And it's like, looking back at it sounds crazy because I struggled in school from literally first grade onward, and here I was a junior, and I was still very much in a proving mindset, and I wanted outside success to prove to myself my worthiness and my competence, and I was asking way too much of a system that wasn't the right system to be asking that for. And I think honestly, no outside validation is ultimately going to give you that level of nourishment. And it's taken many, 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 many years and a lot of deep work of really not projecting that need to be seen as competent and impressive and intelligent and successful onto other people or my career, seeing it reflected back to me and a really like settled sense of okayness in the world that I just that I just feel. And so I've been like peeling that layer off for many, many, many years. And often I feel like I'm at a new edge upon that. But it was really when my body shut down that I said, okay, we need to stop this dance, because this dance will actually shut you down on a very physical level. Like you won't be able to function anymore, and you need to stop proving. And I gave up on trying really to impress anybody and trying to like hack the system and to prove everybody about like how wrong they were about me and how I'll have one semester that will turn everything around. And that gave me a lot of liberation and freedom and room to really be curious about who I am and how I need to learn. And I started really playing with noticing the environments and the ways in where I felt really competent, really capable, and the areas where I felt like I was really struggling, and what were the patterns and the motifs. And I began to like uncover. I still didn't have a dyslexia diagnosis, even though I was super textbook case. I was diagnosed when I was in third grade with just general learning disability, which I quickly wanted to forget because it didn't seem to resonate with my personal experience at all, because learning was like my favorite thing to do. And I love learning and I love thinking about things. So the fact that I was like learning disabled kind of felt like gross and icky and didn't really resonate with my personal experience of reality, because I love learning. So I very much wanted to forget that past. I wanted to forget the many years spent in elementary school where I was sent to a resource room and it was me, maybe like 2 or 3 of the most like nerdy, unactualized kids that were there, and we're just like kind of like understimulated and undervalidated and running around like crazy people. Not to make they definitely weren't crazy people, but I think that there were various systemic things that had us all feel kind of like uninspired to do the work and trying to do worksheets and being bribed by like glittery nail polish or whatever it was. All of that seemed to be a very shameful part of my past, and something that I didn't want to look at and didn't want anybody to know about. And as many of us have learned, that what you resist persists. So the more I didn't want to acknowledge to myself that might have differences in learning, somehow the more it seemed to like dominate the story. And what I love about broadening a conversation around dyslexia is dyslexia takes the conversation from this place of like, oh, you have a learning disability, that for many people doesn't resonate, because they're like, I'm actually great at learning. I just struggle with very specific tasks. And because I struggle with very specific tasks also is the same reason why I excel in very specific tasks. And it's really just a different way of processing information that, depending on the environment, you're either very well suited to or very not well suited to. And everybody has a different profile of strengths and weaknesses, and takes it to kind of like a more judgment neutral term. Dyslexia still has built into the definition, but that's why I like to rebrand it more. And there's a whole community of people that are doing this rebranding around learning differences, away from learning disabilities, because although it's important to use the term disability in terms of like a legal conversation, especially around entitlement to certain testing environments or extra time or those kind of things, the truth is it's just an individual difference the way any other individual difference operates. And every time where you see tremendous strength, you're also going to see weakness on the other side of that strength. And anywhere where you see weakness, you're also going to see strength on the other side. So it's really more of a trade-off model.
I really appreciate substituting learning disability for learning difference. And I think that's really was eye-opening for me, is just because you don't learn, your strength is not to learn the one way that is traditionally taught, doesn't mean that you're disabled, right? It just means you need to learn a different way. How many styles are out there?
Yeah, so it's kind of like really depends how you want to talk about it. It was very in vogue for a while to talk about like Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, and there were like 7 or 9 different types of intelligences, and then there were like these many learning styles. And I think that there are probably like as infinite learning styles as there are individuals, because we're all really completely unique. And what I like to take people on a journey of is people often feel confused about their experience. And then when you reach for kind of like a title, it's extremely helpful because it helps you create a cohesive narrative around what's going on. So it's like, oh yeah, this and this and this and this is my experience because of this and this and this. And it helps create like a really tidy narrative. And it's a great place to start. And I would really encourage people to, like, if dyslexia sounds like it's something that's going on, learn everything you can about dyslexia, learn about the strengths, learn about the weaknesses, and really empower yourself. And then from that point, there's a point too, where those are just kind of like clumsy patterns that other human beings have thought about to explain phenomena that seems to be showing across population. But really, the best source of wisdom and knowledge that you have is your own experience. And the way that we disempower ourselves by like giving our power over often to kind of expertise individuals that are supposed to be like, this is how you learn and this is how you excel. Or very often, if you develop like the cultivation of your awareness of just noticing the ways and environments where you shine and the ways and environments that don't work for you. And after the initial stage, which can take years, but after the initial stage of really understanding the categories that are out there and using that as a startup point, taking control and ownership of you being your own diagnostician, of deepening the listening around what works and what doesn't work, then you're empowered in the long term. And I like taking parents on this journey because often they come to me with this huge thing of paperwork, and this is what this person said is this, and this is what that person said is this, and these are the assistive technologies that were recommended to us, and this is what was recommended to us to support our child in school and to support them in the homework. And I'm like, great, I'm so glad all this information is on the table. Now is actually the experimentation phase instead of like, this is the gospel phase. Because what happens if you actually tell your children, like, this is something we're playing with and we're experimenting, and I want you to actually see if using this app or this assistive technology or listening to audiobooks instead of reading books is helpful. Because if you develop that awareness of like, I'm going to really check in with my experience, like, was it more fun to be listening to the audiobook than to be reading the audiobook? Did I retain more listening to audiobook than reading the audiobook? And if you don't just like shut down and just like, oh, this person said audiobooks and now I have to do audiobooks, then as the technology changes and as the world changes and as the jobs change and as we grow and evolve, you'll actually be empowered to pivot and advocate for yourself and get your needs addressed regardless of how it happens. So I'm really an advocate of reclaiming that sense of like authority around our own lives and of being perpetually involved in the inquiry around our strengths and our weaknesses and how we need to be situated for success.
Mm. So it's interesting you mentioned that with these different learning differences, there tends to be a genetic correlation to that. And let's say we have, there's a parent listening, a mother who's noticing that their elementary school age child is having challenges with learning. There's an opportunity maybe to look at them, at their learning style, maybe their own childhood experience, that of the fathers as well. And, you had mentioned reparenting, but it's really almost like growing ourselves, right? And really, doing that deep observation with ourselves and how we learn as an individual prior to even being able to help your child. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's one of like the highest cases of like heritability out of like a bunch of things. And out of the families that I work with, it's exceptionally rare. If I have two parents that are like traditional learners with a child that's really struggling in the traditional system, sometimes it happens. It's extremely rare. Almost always there's one parent that says, yeah, I really struggled in school. And so it becomes this fascinating journey of the parent really having to look at their own experiences and their assumptions and beliefs that they created around those experiences that get reactivated through the child's experience. And a super common experience that I hear all the time is parents parents that are dealing with their child's issues in school, and they say, well, I went through the exact same experience, but nobody batted an eyelash, and I was kind of shuffled through the grades at school, and everybody just said, well, school isn't fun, or like nobody likes school, or school's tough. And it actually had this like tremendously detrimental impact on my life. And nobody ever gave me language for it or explained it. And the amount of parents that have cried during my sessions or cried during my workshops is tremendous, because often it's like, now that there's more awareness and their child is going through it, all of a sudden it can touch something very deep in the development of self and the development in psyche that often hasn't been really addressed or looked at for a long time. And I like to tell the groups that I teach, like, if you wonder how your experiences in school have had any impact on your beliefs around willpower, your beliefs around discipline, your beliefs around authority, your beliefs around like motivation, your beliefs around intelligence, around success, around competence, if you're worried if you're curious about like how your experiences impact the way you show up in your parenthood, they definitely do. Like, some people are like wondering like, oh, how do I know if my experience as a child will show up? They will show up. And regardless of whether or not you had good experiences, it's going to be in the space. So if you had a parent where school was a place where they got a tremendous sense of I'm reaching for a word, approval, and where they really maybe relied on doing well in school as a way to indicate their okayness in their world, it might be more triggering in some ways to have a child that is struggling in school, because they might remember the ways in which school was so pivotal as almost like a cornerstone for their well-being. And so it might even be more disorienting for them that a child isn't doing well in school. Or it might be a completely different experience that a parent who struggled in school and then sees their child struggling, and that parent may be up against really knowing how to disentangle their child's experience from their own experience. And there might be a sense of like increased temptation towards like projection, or to feeling like their child is experiencing things the same way they experience things because they're up against similar challenges. And so in each family system, you're looking at so many different things, and it's extremely rare for a family system to have two parents that are going to look at these issues at the same time. So often you'll have like one parent that thinks this is like really needs to be addressed, really needs to be understood, really needs targeted intervention, and another parent that might have a grin and bear it. This is life. Life isn't always easy and peaches, and this is what makes people tough, and this is what gives people grit, and this is what gives people willpower. And I'm not saying necessarily that that's wrong, but I am saying it's extremely common to have two parents deal with a child not doing well in very different ways, and bring their own life experiences, their own narratives, their own traumas to the way that they go ahead and reach for tools, that they navigate the conversation, that they collaborate with the school, that they collaborate with teachers. It's always in the middle.
Oh my God, I love it. And of course, I'm thinking about myself as a parent now. I have a 2-year-old son, and he hasn't started school yet, but I'm like now really curious to have a conversation with my husband about his childhood experience, because I didn't know him as a child. I don't know exactly, we've never talked about, how much he likes school or not, right? It hasn't been a major part of but now I'm really curious, like what was his experience, reflected against my experience as a child in school, and, what type of school would we be looking at for our son? These are all really interesting questions. And, to me, it's really about, recognizing what our son needs and supporting that, despite what our needs were or what works for us. Right.
Yeah. I have a spiritual belief, take it or leave it, that like our children really pick us as parents. And so I really think that like it's perfect. Like it's a perfect match. Like even if it's a really activating match, and even if it brings up a lot, I think that like there's a reason why our kids picked us and our stories and our baggage and our history to be their guides and ushers in the world.
Yeah, and they get to be our guides as well. It's definitely mutually beneficial relationship. So I agree with that. And when there is that activation and those triggers, there's just more opportunity for healing and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so often, I know you brought up a lot of my work has to do with reparenting work, and it's amazing. I've had hundreds of parents come through the program, and in the first week of the program, we do a Zoom video, and I take them through like a PowerPoint. And when we start is this round robin where we go around to different people's video screens and people share, and it's a check-in on with the parents. How would you like to feel as mom or dad in the experience of parenthood if you can wave a magic wand? If you can wave a magic wand and show up, mama, and feel, or dad, and feel up, or other caregiver, and show up in whichever way you want to show up, how would you want to feel? And it's phenomenal to me, the percentage of parents that answer that question for their children. So they'll say like, well, I just want my child to be happy. Well, I just want my child to feel X, Y, and Z, or I don't want my child to suffer. And not start with like, I would like to feel a sense of relief, or I would like to not go to bed worrying. Like the hesitancy around claiming the I as a mom, and like really allowing the parent to have an experience around their parenthood that is not focused on the child, but is their own experience as a response from the child, right? So who's the mom in the story? Who's the dad? Because they're a huge part of the story. And often what I see that are real points of contact, points of tension in the parenting. Let's say there was a huge point of tension with a 12-year-old girl named Megan, and the moms come in and it's all about Megan. Often what we see is, let's say it's same gender, so daughter and mother, is that there's a lot of work that the mother actually needs to do in terms of healing her own woundedness when she was 12. So it starts off and it's like, oh, it's all about my daughter, Megan. And often a huge component of what's going on is actually like the little mom, the mom when she was 12. And whatever wasn't healed in that time period is going to be reactivated and showing up again in the parenting space.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You know, that's the conscious parenting 101 is when we do get triggered by our children, especially, you know, there's a reason for that. And there's a blessing in that. Actually, there's a gift that we can choose to accept or not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Because let's talk about, what do you mean by reparenting? How do you do that with the parents that you work with?
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of somatic experiencing work. And I really think that like half the story is getting to the place of like, aha, like, oh my gosh, I get it. Like, I get why I'm triggered in this moment. I get why my child's angry. I get the way I need to respond. And I don't want to poo-poo that at all, because that's a huge part of the work, is like the intellectual understanding and piecing everything together. And it's massive. Once I get, but I really only think it will take us halfway to the finish line. And if we really want to transform the way we show up, and if we really want to actually respond differently, we have to go into the body, and we have to actually, on a body level, retrain the nervous system. So like you can say, a million times that this and this experience shouldn't trigger you, or you shouldn't be in fear about your child doing this and this, and you should be trusting, and you should be this, and you should be that. And to take the leap from knowing it intellectually to actually like embodying it, actually it takes a tremendous amount of like cultivation and holding, and like a very specific container being developed. And so I'm very passionate about that work. So I do a lot of somatic experiencing work built into the kind of like coaching and facilitating that I do, which really takes parents deep into their body and where the trauma and the pain is held in their body. And we go ahead and we let go and we reprogram what's there. And I just want to say like a little caveat on trauma. A lot of people are like, oh, I didn't experience trauma. And that's because there's a lot of definitions of what trauma is. And I did a podcast with Dr. Dan Siegel, who's many of you guys are familiar with. And I love his Yeah, exactly. And I love his definition of trauma. And he says trauma is any time we have a life experience that exceeds our ability to cope or adapt to the experience, right? So especially when we're children and we don't have so many tools and abilities to cope and adapt, a lot of things can leave us with trauma. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just becomes, kinks in our wiring that you need to go back in and kind of like take a look at them and release them. That's all. So doing the work of really like going deep into the body and of letting go and taking a look at some of those experiences that often have not been looked at or held or seen in a long time.
Mm-hmm. I just actually did a video about the Whole Brain Child's book. That book was life-changing for me. I need to get Dr. Siegel on my podcast as well, because what he explains is understanding the normal neurological development of the brain and the left and right hemispheres. And really, to your point, recognizing in a young child, they can't process different large, feelings, emotions, and experiences the same way as a more mature brain, because their left brain's not there yet, right? It just hasn't developed yet fully. So when we have that expectation for them to be logical and they appear to have a tantrum and be illogical, it can be frustrating for parents, but there's actually a scientific reason for it. And then there's an opportunity as the parent of how do we support our child in processing these really large emotions in the heat of the moment. That's so cool. So reparenting, to me, that really sounds a lot like a parent's opportunity to become more aware of their subconscious mind, more aware of their childhood patterns, their childhood traumas. And to your point, that trauma doesn't have to be anything extraordinary to still count as trauma to their 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old brain that is running the subconscious mind, and becoming conscious of it, right? We really can't shift and grow and change if we're not aware.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And we can recognize as parents is that when we do that work on ourselves, we are creating a better version of ourselves as parents, and our children will benefit from that. And that's where we get to go back and forth and not just have our children learn from us, but we can actually learn from our children.
Yeah. And I'm a big advocate that like, it's not possible to excel in the parenting space and not do that work. And so many parents that I come with, they're like, no, this isn't complicated. Like, this actually isn't about my childhood. This is about the fact that like my 8-year-old or 9-year-old or 10-year-old or 12-year-old is in a school that doesn't appreciate them and they're struggling, and I have a child that is, having a meltdown every day at homework. And they're like, this has nothing to do with me. This is nothing, like, objectively, this is a terrible situation. And then as we begin to uncover, it's like, well, why for you particularly are you like in panic about this? Like, why specifically does this bring rage or judgment or a sense of like a deep sense of hopelessness or grief or sadness? Because there are other parents that will react completely differently to this dynamic. And so quickly, it's like, yes, all those things are true. And I don't want to minimize the impact that like there's a lot of systemic and environmental things that are having a big impact, and those things need to be changed. And you bring yourself to the experience as well. You bring yourself to the parenting. You bring yourself to then your interactions with your significant other and your spouse or your partner. So it's like when your child's having the meltdown in the kitchen, who are you then later with the other siblings? Who are you then later with the important people that are in your life? Who are you then later with your spouse or your partner? How do you show up at work later? There's all of a sudden, it becomes clear and evident that you can't actually ever dismiss the self.
Right. You can't. And I'm so grateful that you just made that point too, of when there's a real challenge going on in our life. And let's use the case of parenting, to not point fingers around, right? And be like, well, it's my child's fault, or it's the school's fault, or it's that teacher's fault. And just, that's really kind of playing into that victim mentality, instead of really I think stepping up and owning our piece, right? Owning our piece in the whole equation.
Yeah. Well, I'd actually say it a little differently. I'd say it much more as a combination approach. I think that actually, because I think there's like systemic injustice in the ways that like our schools are really not an even playing field for all different types of skills and abilities. And like there is some outside pointing fingers that sometimes needs to happen in order as like an important first step. Like, yes, it's not fair that your child is, an 8-year-old and says that they can't face another day and that they hate themselves and is crying every day. Like that, like, yes, there are systemic things that are not fair, and it's not fair that society looks like that. And it's not fair that, like, if when you look at other cultures and the way schools have existed over decades, that there are other configurations that would benefit your child much more. And there's a lot of inequities that are not fair, and being able to really like claim it, and especially for children to be heard, like it 100% makes sense that you feel that way. Like it makes sense. Like, yes, that's not okay. Yes, that's not fair. And at the same time, to be able to like hold both at the same time. Yes, there are lots of things that are not okay. And yes, at the same time, what can we do to meet the experience? And I think like culturally, it's very hard for people to hold both. And we tend to like reach for one extreme or the other extreme. Like either we want to completely collapse into this sense of like hopelessness and despair, or like this is all about the other people, or we want to overemphasize our own sense of like, I can pick myself up by my bootstraps, and in a way that doesn't really recognize that we are at the effect of a bunch of like environmental and systemic things that can ultimately like disempower us in the way that we might not use our voice to go ahead and make changes, because we have a belief that like, I just need to generate myself to be okay regardless of the circumstances, which can take you very far. But unless you have a healthy sense of entitlement of like, you know what, maybe things should be different, then maybe you won't go ahead and help make things different for other people. So I really think or for yourself. So I really think it's about holding, these opposing ideas in opposite hands.
Mm-hmm. That's very well said. So we just have a couple minutes left in this episode. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the parents listening in?
Well, my podcast is on hiatus, but I have tons and tons and tons of episodes that people can listen to if inspired. And
the Dyslexia Quest.
The Dyslexia Quest. And I love working with parents one-on-one. And the work that I do with parenting and helping parents hold space for their children extends beyond dyslexia. And if there's somebody listening to this that would like to do that kind of like reparenting work, even though there's nothing dyslexia specific, I love to work with those kind of situations as well. And yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm so grateful for you taking the time to come on the show today and to share your wisdom, your passion, very articulated, clearly and compassionately to the parents listening in. And if this work calls to you, I really hope, I'm speaking to the parents, I'm hoping that they'll reach out to you and get this support that it could really shift the trajectory of their the relationship with their child and the relationship their child has with learning.
My pleasure, Laura.